Dr. Gulfaraz Ahmed Shah wants to say.
Just that I tend to agree with you on the revenue assignment. It's that you do need some own source revenue, even if there are inequalities, but you also at the same time need a proper equalization framework. Any tax reform, if it is to succeed, has to have a corresponding equalization framework. And if you have the two, then this political economy objection that you raise disappears. And you do need the own source revenues for accountability. And I think I did try and I'm sorry if it didn't come through, but I actually agree with you on this point, but that the own source revenues is needed.
I'd like to ask Dr. Gulfaraz Ahmed.
And Dr. Ehtesham, Madam Rehana, and the very Central Bank of Pakistan's press, what an opportunity to stand before you and attempt to share my thoughts. It's a very vast canvas. Dr. Ehtesham has tried to map it, and he's done it in a very outline form. So I would first restrict my comments on the National Finance Award. Maybe I would have very little credentials to speak on other topics. The very first thing one wants, we are a federation. And there are a number of federations in the world, but all countries not federations. Why federate? Why the federating units choose to create a federation, bring about a federation? For two primary purposes. Number one, they would have greater prosperity together than they could achieve alone. Prosperity is the primary driver. And second, they would have stronger security together than would have alone. Security and prosperity go together. Ours is a very peculiar federation. The very federal country, Pakistan, actually was brought about by the federating units, by the power of the vote of individuals. 1945 December and February 1946 elections, and then the referendum of 18 July 1947 in what was then called NWFT. This federation was brought about by the power of the vote, the sovereign will of the people who resided in those provinces, and provinces acted as constituent units, the constituencies. The very territory of the Federal Republic of Pakistan is defined as the territory composed of the provinces. The provinces have a preeminence character in bringing about the federation and thereby retaining preeminent role in running the federation. At least, so is the historical legacy. You also know that in all such functions which are coming about, federations which are coming about federation brought about by the federating units, the residuary powers are the fountain of power which is always kept with the provinces, where with the changing needs of time they can evolve more functions and rights, and that is the case in Pakistan. There is some measure of political federalism in our constitution, but what was missing was fiscal federalism. In order even to achieve the very purposes of political federalism, there was no fiscal federalism. Take the case of the provincial functions. Those functions which were neither in the federal list nor at that time in the concurrent list, they were only provincial functions. No one else could perform those functions other than the provinces. And the minimum autonomy, fiscal autonomy was that the provinces should be able to perform those functions which are only their functions through rights to the share of revenue. not based on grants and subventions, their rights in the Federal Consolidated Fund. So this time, and before that, let me just say in passing, why are the revenues raised in the federations? Not distribute the money equally per capita, but to provide services or to do the development. And therefore, it is essential to see equalization of the services, the user's end, rather than equalization of the rupee per capita you distribute, as has been the case from 1974 till last year, that money was divided equally on per capita basis. Nobody ever thought that the purpose was to provide service. How much will it cost to provide the same service per capita in Baluchistan than in the crowded areas of Punjab or Sindh? So there were a number of anomalies in the past. There's another aspect of Pakistan. The revenue collection is highly centralized. Among all the notable federations in the world, Pakistan is the most centralized federation in revenue collection. More than 90% of the total expenditure carried out by the provinces comes from federal transfers. We have other federations which are centralized, but less than Pakistan, that is India and Australia. And they have also tried to manage. Let me just say that centralization of collection of revenue per se is not a bad thing. Unless you have nearly equal revenue raising capacities, as Dr. Zubair has alluded to, what do you decentralize? Tomorrow, do you say that, okay, let all the wine taxes be collected by the provincial government and spent for their needs? Will that work? No. Because we know that at least 2 of the 4 federating units have no revenue raising capacity. And that is the historical anomalies that Dr. Zubair referred to. So when you have a centralized revenue collection, let's look at the glass half full. It gives you an opportunity to then distribute the revenue through a framework of equalization Dr. Shamil has been talking about. So we should be able to take advantage in the federal transfers, federal fiscal transfers. We can bring about the equalization process. Looking at the horizontal distribution that is used to be called, we have 4 federating units. We need to distribute revenues among them. And the least appropriate mechanism was on population. Can you think of it? If you take 4 provinces, leaving aside the federal areas, Baluchistan is 45% of the area of the 4 provinces, but only 5% population. And they literally got 5% share from the divisible pool. And if you try to take it to the map, which is nearly half the map of the federation, how can you develop? So those, as far as the horizontal distribution is concerned, at least we try to generate a new spirit in the NFC, horizontal fiscal equalization. We are not going to get there in one NFC, but the direction has to be set. Now, what is the NFC? 9 members, only the chairman represents the federal government, rest 8 are provincial government. And if there is an environment of democratic freedom, how can one person prevail upon the wills and wishes of 8 people? And when the provinces said that we need this time 60% of the divisible pool share, and they try to express the needs, achievements of million development goals, the new local government system with greater capacity, greater needs, all those things. And later on, through all the deliberations, all that we did was drop to 57.5% from 2011-12 onward. And now, if you look at 57.5%, it increased from 47.5%. A 10 percentile increase in the provincial share at the expense of federal government. How can the federal government run if its share is reduced by 10 percentile points. But along with that, there was another predication. The chairman who represented the federal government was also the powerful stakeholder, was the Minister of Finance. And he said, okay, I pander to the needs of the provinces. We need to develop the country. We'll give them 57.5%. But with the remaining 57.5%, with the remaining, is it 42.5% or whatever it is? With the remaining, I can't run the federal government. That was as plain as that. But then, provinces are part of the same federation, that's where the people reside, and people had to then respond to that. And the way it was done was that every year, during the course of those 5 years, we will increase tax to GDP ratio by 1%. And by the end of the 5 years, we'll take it to 15%. Those revenue projections are based upon this yearly increase by 1% of tax to GDP ratio. We saw that size of the pie, and everybody thought if that is how the pie will expand, with these percentages, the provinces will be happy and catch up with the development, and federal government will be able to run. I just want to say here that NFC award was strictly predicated on the projected increase in tax to GDP. The only thing that didn't happen, that predication was not actually included in the NFC award. Looking with the hindsight, I feel that we would have been wiser in including that, because the NFC award has no character of its own unless the pie increases the way. And let me also just say, I went on a step further and I said Baluchistan is catching up. Catching up role is very different. And if tomorrow the revenue collection goes down and their share goes down, how can they really catch up? How can they project their developmental budget into a few years' vision? And then we actually got a unanimous agreement of everybody that whatever these projections, based upon that predication, Baluchistan share is guaranteed. Even if the collection went down, they will get this amount and it will be made up by the federal government. Federal government had no bottom-up resource. They were only wanting to do that by increasing the taxes. So that is something hasn't happened. Let me also mention here that when we did the horizontal fiscal equalization, we addressed the fundamentals. That if population was used as basis for distribution, why was it used? Very convincingly, because that is a disparity. One province has more population than the rest three put together. Therefore, you have to keep the population in mind when you're distributing the resources. What that did, it established a principle that the basis of distribution would have to be disparities. Then we said, fine, once that is established as a principle, let's look at other main disparities. And we were able to then articulate that the poverty and backwardness, which is relative, the whole country is poor and backward, but relatively among the four provinces, there is